Hello, and welcome to On the Irregular with Java Beret, a podcast where I chat to women from all walks of life about their own unique creative journey, how they got here, how their story has shaped their creative work, what they've learned, what has helped them, and where they plan to go from here. It's an irregular journey for so many of us, and I am delighted to offer a platform to share these fascinating stories and wells of wisdom. This week, we catch up with the second half of my chat with Australian actress Kiruna Stamell. If you missed the first chapter, you can catch up by listening to last week's episode. On this half of our chat, we continue to talk about Kiruna's work as an actress on stage and screen. Plus, we discuss burlesque as a radical act, how Orange is the New Black raised the bar for TV forever, and the logistics of working as an actor with a disability on a film set. Welcome to Chapter 2 with Kiruna Stamell.
So you, after your piece with Quarantine, which is when I met you, you decided to stay in the UK. What were your thoughts on staying in the UK instead of versus going back to Australia?
Well, I decided to stay in the UK because I saw more work was being made. Generally, there was more television being made, there were more dramas being told. There was also a lot more theatre. I mean, the UK's got a fabulous theatre culture, but what it's really got over Australia is theatre that's kind of medium-sized. So where I found people kind of more accepting of my difference and being open to me acting and kind of exploring character tends to be in that kind of middle scale theatre, regional touring, or kind of that kind of medium-sized space. And Australia as a country is geographically, it's the size of Europe, and it has a population of 20 million who are quite spread out. So as a marketplace for theatre and art, it's not really a massively viable space, simply because your audience is so spread out that you spend a lot of time traveling to get to them, which means economically doing theatre tours and things like that doesn't really bring in a lot of revenue. You might in Australia get your massive kind of West End equivalent of one or two musicals that will kind of do a tour of all the different states. You'll have a major state theatre company, and then you'll have a lot of kind of first-time emerging artists and companies that are able to kind of get together the seed funding. But then there's a huge gap of anything in between that kind of scale. Because you can imagine things like the Sydney Theatre Company, I mean, they're getting much better now. But in terms of diversity, we're very conservative. I mean, you know, you were talking about things that are kind of the equivalent of, the Royal Opera House or the National Ballet. And they tend to be quite conservative spaces when it comes to casting, even in terms of, diversity on, basic appearance differences. So I really felt that there was more opportunity for me based in the UK, as well as generally I felt like people, maybe it's just, again, the population, the concentration of the population, but there were more people for me to meet who were kind of cool and open to me. Whereas in, Australia, there was a large group of the population that had grown up in the same monoculture as myself. And, some people are really awesome and open-minded and relaxed and salt of the earth. And, some people aren't. But I think in the UK, I just felt like, there was more chance of me meeting people that were really genuinely comfortable with diversity.
Okay. That's interesting. I'm glad you met that branch of people.
Yeah, you were one of them. You and your posse down in Cotton Hill.
Fun times. Because actually, at a time when we were living together, you were doing burlesque at the time as well, which kind of incorporated your dance and your tap dancing. I remember that being a really exciting time, I think, because a lot of it
was a big sort of experiment for me. I mean, it was me exploring, my sexual identity, as a woman, and things that for a long time in my life I'd actually denied. Because when you walk down the street and you're written off by strangers of, as a dwarf, or you're objectified and you're othered, my sense of actually being a woman and sexy was kind of was really far removed from the experiences and reflections of myself that I saw in others. And I think there was I was deeply lonely at times, deeply lonely, like kind of old lady who'd lost her husband of 70 years, kind of lonely. And I think, me kind of dabbling in burlesque was me kind of trying to take that power back. And it's interesting because I had a journey that a lot of women often have, which is, you explore your sexiness and you put yourself up there and you control the gaze and the way that you're being looked at. But then you also realize that there's a point that hits its limit. And it was like, oh, so I'm going to be up here and really sexy and clever with it, and that's it, is it? Like, where do I go from there? Like that, I felt on one hand it was really awesome and freeing, but then it also ran into its own kind of dead end. And I think, yeah, so it was a really exciting time.
It's interesting, yeah. I guess like you're saying, that it had a limited trajectory, what you were doing, but that doesn't take away the value of what you were doing, for yourself, like you were saying, exploring your own sexuality and controlling the narrative, and perhaps, just showing yourself in a different way, to, like you're saying, like, to be, that you're often written off as not being perceived in that way. And so I can understand, like you said, that, well, yeah, there's a dead end, you hit a ceiling, but that is of great value, just also just for you, for your own personal, I guess, for your own personal exploration. And it's something that, I mean, it's huge, isn't it? Because it's like, it comes down to like what we were talking about earlier, about the very limited idea of what we are fed as is what is sexy, and like, and like, even like what you were saying about trans, and about how the trans people that often make it to the cover of magazines are people who still fit a very specific mold of what is sexy.
Oh, they're very rarely overweight or disabled or disfigured in any way. I mean, I did really enjoy it.
Yeah.
I think what was interesting for me was it, beyond the stage, it wasn't translating into the kind of radical social experience that I wanted it to translate into in terms of my life and the real world. So I think in the framing of it was really helpful, and it was a really great thing to do, and I really enjoyed the space. But I think it's a little bit like, once you leave that space, I mean, maybe I'd kind of had a positive effect and changed a few perceptions within the room. But beyond that, I felt like I was still having the same conversation over and over again. And maybe actually even resetting to do another show felt sometimes like, oh, I'm having the same conversation again with a brand new crowd who are starting on the same level of the back foot that the crowd last night started on. And actually, when I dabbled in stand-up comedy for a while, that was actually my biggest bugbear. And probably why I kind of stopped doing stand-up quite quickly, in that I just felt like every time I was back on stage, I was in front of a brand new crowd of people who needed the same level of hand-holding as the group that had been in last night, to kind of get where I was coming from, but before I'd even started.
Yeah, that must be incredibly frustrating. Yeah.
I think it is. And I think actually, I mean, I know that, my dwarfism is a big part of that, but I think a lot of female comedians generally probably have that same frustration, where they get up there and simply because they're a woman, it's not expected that they're automatically going to be funny. Whereas, a cis white male gets up there and it's assumed, oh, he's starting from a neutral place from which he'll be hilarious. And if he's not hilarious, he's a bit crap. Whereas everybody else outside that is starting kind of just a step behind. And then depending on your level of privilege, you're starting further and further behind that. And that doesn't mean you can't be funny. It just means frustratingly, you're not automatically expected to be funny. So you're having to prove something before you've even begun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I get that. And so how have you found that in, because I mean, burlesque and comedy, it's very much you, focused on you, but you're the one doing the writing and the choreography. How, I mean, TV and film and theatre, you don't have the agency there and the control. Um, how have you dealt with that? Because I imagine there must have been situations where have you had to hold, like you said, hand holding of the director or of the writers?
Yes, actually, I've had a couple of moments like that where, but again, it's interesting because it's a bit generational. So
Hmm.
as I've gotten older, so I'm 40 now, I've realized that a lot of people who are directing and writing and have positions of power that I'm now working with are of my generation. And the biggest difference, I think, is that my generation expected a certain level of integration within their education system. So if you had a wheelchair user at your primary school and you were my age, that was just the way it was. Whereas for the generation above me, you wouldn't have had a special needs student at your school in your class. So I'm, one of the first, well, one of the first generations of physically disabled Australians to expect to go to an ordinary government school, for example.
Hmm.
And I feel like that integration, although it's not always properly funded and supported, actually has a really positive impact on the generation of students that are also there at the same time. And I've realized that my most recent works have been directed by men, mostly men still, although actually the current job, we've got female directors, are people that are much closer to my age. So have that shared kind of cultural experience of, well, of course you'd be here, and of course you'd be human. Um, the generation above, when I've worked with them, sort of people in their, late 50s and 60s, I've had to do a little bit more hand holding in terms of appropriateness, maybe of script or some of the movement and choreography, where it's, I've had to say, look, the way that you've placed me, I'm not an exhibiting dwarf in this show. So we need to look at the way that this has been worded or written, or the way that you've blocked the scene, because you're kind of repositioning me as if I were an exhibiting dwarf, and I'm not. I'm just one of the ensemble. Interesting about that is that the majority of that generation are open to the conversation,
Okay, right. That's
but
yeah.
I'm still having to have it. And the ones who aren't open tend not to hire me, which is interesting because I had a fellow actor say, "Oh, you worried, Kiruna, about getting a reputation for being difficult?" And I said, "No, because either somebody's open to the conversation with me or they're not open to it. So actually, I'm filtering them out. It's not necessarily the other way."
And that's really interesting that somebody would perceive you as being difficult for expressing, I guess, boundaries and also taking the time to educate someone and say, well, no, this isn't correct. Like, for example, I remember particularly a scene you were doing a BBC drama when we were living together, and you were part of an ensemble, and I think the director kept on sitting you on a stool.
Oh, yes, kept trying to get me the right height for the shot.
Yeah.
So they'd cheat me onto furniture. And I was like, look, I might legitimately climb on a chair to reach something or stand on this to be part of something, but not in every scene. Like, I'm sorry, you're just going to at some point have to shoot me
Yeah.
and do a camera setup that gets me in the shot, rather than try to work out how to elevate me so that I'm neatly in the shot all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
that's interesting too, because that comes down to ideology, but also budget.
Yeah.
So that was a drama that, they were trying to shoot like a soap. So, they do the two shot where you've got two actors roughly the same height stood next together and you get them in the one shot.
Mm.
You can't do that with me because I'm so short that I'm around somebody's waist height, that you either need to do a wide to achieve that, or you need to specifically get a single on me and my reaction. And when productions are kind of, planning their shots and things, if somebody hasn't worked with me before, they might forget that or not realize that. So, then trying to sandwich me into being the right height up the back of the shot by positioning me on a pew or balanced on some kind of precarious box that just by dumb luck is there in the scene. Can kind of start to be a little bit like, my character wouldn't necessarily always be standing on this.
Yeah. So, okay, so in terms of budget, then it's about prioritizing where the budget goes. Spend a bit less on catering, the directors take a bit less of a fee. It's not. I think it's totally valid what you're saying about budget, but it's not an excuse.
Oh God, no. And I think the budget thing's interesting because I think often when you work with a disabled actor, what you need to actually allow for is a little bit of extra time. So I, on this job, had a day where I said to the producers, I need to meet the set designer and the props guys. They need to see what I can hold, what I can't hold, what my general reach is, so that when I walk into a scene and you've written that I open the door, I can reach the door handle. Yeah. If they know those things before they build them, then that will make our job much easier. If you don't give me the time to do that and you just write a scene where I walk in and open the door, but no one's measured me ever, and the door handle is at some kind of artistically arbitrated height, and I can't then reach it, you've just made a rod for your own back, and you've actually added additional time to that day's shooting because we're going to have to creatively work around that or cheat that I'm opening the door or, things like that people just kind of don't realize. A disabled actor on top of the acting is also constantly problem solving access issues that are just made up and invented or created by the space, but don't necessarily have to be there or be a problem. And they're certainly not the point or objective of a scene.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like needs a whole more holistic approach from everyone.
And it's interesting actually because do you know where I found a lot of overlap? Working with the intimacy coordinator, because I have a scene that required intimacy, and I didn't actually have to do any bump and grind, so there was no kind of humping or simulated sex in the scene. But me and Ita, who was the intimacy coordinator on the project, got into chatting about intimacy within production. And I was saying, well, for example, my finger length means I can't self-insert a tampon, so I need us to shoot intimacy scenes when I've not got my period, or if you let me know when the intimacy scene is, because I'm on the pill, I can make sure that I time my menstrual cycle around that so that I'm not going to have my period when we're filming. And she was like, oh my God, I hadn't even thought of that. And I'm like, disabled women all over the country are making choices like that all the time. And she was like, God, no, I don't want you to have to, to regulate your menstrual cycle around work. And I was like, look, it's actually nothing to me because, I've got polycystic ovarian syndrome anyway. So when I have a period, it's artificial. So whether I move it 3 days either side of a shoot date, as long as it's not a regular occurrence, it's actually not something that I'm concerned by. Or I was saying if we were doing a scene which required, simulated sex, because of my short legs, as long as there was a barrier between me and whoever was playing my lover, we'd be all right. But I'm not going to have the kind of clearance an actress with longer legs would be able to provide. So things like that, practical things, or because my body is shorter, how do you shoot me naked without getting the nipple in shot? So certain framing stuff, or I was saying, she said, is there anything in your intimacy scene that you're concerned by? And I went, there's one moment where I have to get down off the bed, and there is no elegant way for me naked to get off the bed without a hello boys kind of moment. And she said, well, that's cool. we can know where that is and make sure that that isn't filmed.
Mm-hmm.
Or we'll cheat where we have you naked on the bed, but then when you get off the bed, we are shooting from the shoulders up,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, we're shooting your partner or whatever. And it's interesting because I thought there's intimacy, which for an actor is all about the anxieties of their body, really, or how they might feel about their body in that vulnerable space. And how interesting that it was the one area that really, for me, overlapped very strongly with disability politics,
Mm-hmm.
because disability politics is also very much tied into the anxiety we all have about our bodies. And are we doing it normally? And is it normal? And is it all okay? And you know, and our vulnerability as a human being with a body. So, yeah, she and I had a really big chat about that. And it was very, very interesting because, you know, my disability in a simulated sex scene, you know, will have an impact on positions that we could fake, or what I can and can't cover while I'm meant to be simulating a romantic situation with somebody, or, you know, how my body might look in certain positions and how it would look in others, which all actors have as anxieties during an intimacy scene.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've just got some practical things as well that overlap with disability. But yeah, I find it's interesting, you know, because even your non-disabled actress is worried about farting during an intimacy scene. You know, and the male actor is worried about getting an involuntary erection and feeling humiliated in front of the entire crew. So there's a fabulous area for overlap there.
God, I'm so glad I'm not an actor anymore. Jesus. There's just so much there.
There's so much about the profession. And then on top of all that ordinary stress that the profession naturally brings, you are in and out of work at the drop of a hat. You know, and I think the inconsistency of employment on top of the strains of the job when you've actually got the job make it such a terrifying career to pursue. Like, you've really got to be into it.
And you are. I mean, and you work a lot.
Yeah, I've got a lot of work that's come my way, actually. And you know, something that's really gorgeous that happened this year, I had gone for a few auditions that I really wanted and I didn't get them. And each of them went to a different actress with dwarfism who I know, a couple actually, so not just the one, but it went to a few different people. And initially I was kind of all insecure about it because I was like, oh my God, I'm 40. I'm never going to work again. They're all younger and hotter and fitter than me. Is that what this is about? And actresses hit 40 and they just suddenly play mums. And, you know, I can't imagine many writers writing mum characters that they would let me play because of their own prejudices and blah, blah, blah. And then I landed Serpent Queen, which is an awesome gig. And I'm loving it. But what was really interesting was the other jobs I didn't get all went to different actresses, and all in the same year, all really decent roles.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is actually fantastic,
Mm-hmm.
in that such a niche casting, which you'd think it'd be just, you know, short-statured woman with dwarfism, however you want to refer to us,
Mm-hmm.
actually has finally started to open up, that in a year that there were several castings, we've all landed in roles that were appropriate for us, but also the diversity within us as a group.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we're such a potentially niche group, it was really lovely to kind of go, oh, the industry is actually recognizing the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something that really struck me, actually, because there's quite a few call outs for the castings. The prequel to The Witcher, there's a couple of other comedy roles, you know, a couple of other small jobs that came up. I'd filmed Brassic recently, and to kind of see that each of us has found a role that actually was very much a match for the individual actress was really refreshing, rather than it just feel like, oh, any old tick box and they're going to shove anybody in the role. That the casting has really become much more nuanced. And even though we're quite a niche group, our nicheness has no longer been regarded as kind of the ultimate determiner of who we are, but rather it actually is becoming the right actress for the right role.
Yeah.
So I've been really chuffed by that.
That really reminds me of a conversation we had where it was quite a few years ago, where you said, my main goal is to get onto a soap. I want to be on Coronation Street or EastEnders, because I feel like that is so mainstream that will be recognition of me as a human within a role, rather than as a kind of like a token.
Yep.
And
completely.
And then I remember you were on EastEnders.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, did a couple of episodes of EastEnders. And then what is nice is soap is slowly starting to open up and include disabled people. You've got the wonderful Liz Carr, who had a great stint on Silent Witness, who's now basically off doing Hollywood films. So it is slowly changing. I mean, sometimes people will be like, oh, it's, political correctness gone mad. And I'm like, if you can name on one hand the disabled actors you've seen on TV, knowing that, 20% of the population are disabled at any point, that's not really representation. But I think it is slowly changing, and I'm seeing it change in theatre now as well, which is really good, as well as on TV. And I think representation in television will have the biggest social impact, because I think as long as we are not playing tropes anymore, and disabled people are, exploring beyond those kind of stereotypical roles, I think it slowly starts to normalize things for the population, and people start to be less surprised when they see me in real life, because they'd see me in a drama years before, or somebody like me in a drama years before, or even just a woman with an unusual nose. I mean, appearance discrimination is just so rife in our community that I think normalizing difference, which is so bloody normal to begin with, because it exists and it's everywhere and it's naturally occurring and it's organic. I just, I see that as a really good thing.
Yeah, definitely. Because I remember the role that you played in EastEnders, and it was, you've done bigger, greater roles, but it felt like it was very natural. You played a primary school teacher.
Yep.
You were offered a role that you fit, and it wasn't about your physicality and about what you looked like. It was just a natural fit for the actress, and that felt refreshing.
And I think, although things are changing, I still think actually for all actors, really, it is refreshing when you see an actor in a role that feels like a really comfortable, natural, and organic fit. Sometimes I think actually it feels artificial when we go the other way and everybody's slightly too beautiful.
Yeah.
And you think, they're not really living there in that kind of apartment. No one can afford that. Or, you don't get that many hot people in one workplace.
Oh, completely. Yeah. I think I went to watch something on Amazon yesterday, and it's interesting. I think that my what I expect from TV and film has shifted dramatically in the past 10 years, and I think a lot of it comes down to watching Orange Is the New Black.
Oh, yeah.
Such a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
Because it was just like, oh, thank God, it's not a series about white men or with blonde white women with big boobs and tiny waists, know, and of average height and of average everything, or like what is being fed to us is what is average. It was just so refreshing. And since then, I don't want to watch anything unless it's basically, it meets that bar in terms of, I mean, I'm not sure about the diversity in terms of disability in Orange Is the New Black, but it felt like the beginning of telling stories of people that you don't usually see on TV and film.
Oh, definitely. And I think one of the benefits of Orange Is the New Black is that it just had more than 2 women in it, which meant they needed to go and, open up and get people that were kind of just, considered diverse. And I think we see more diversity in men on television, simply because in scripts there's often more than two men. So you need the best friend, and you need the best friend of the best friend, and you need them to kind of not all look the same so that you can follow the story.
Yeah.
And I think with women, when often there's two of us or less and we're talking about the male protagonist, that same diversity.
Yeah, and one of them's always the love interest, and then the other one will be the friend. Yeah.
Exactly. And they'll both equally be beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's nice that I think that's changing. But I'm like you, actually, in that I have turned off from stories that I felt like I'd seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself not watching things that were too kind of homogenous or kind of old school formulaic, in that, oh, well, we're just going to cast people that kind of look a certain way and it'll be, escapist fantasy.
Yeah. I don't find it escapist. I just watch it and I just go, this is what's wrong with society. And it's interesting because a lot of films that I used to love, I can't watch them anymore. And I used to enjoy revisiting them. And now if I even attempt to revisit them, it's like, oh no.
Yeah. And I like TV and film that knows that it's pretend and isn't trying to beautify, but in some kind of dishonest way, our world, but then tell me that that's reality.
Yeah, like Dawson's Creek.
Yes, like don't lie to me and tell me that this is the real world.
Yeah,
like, know that you're pretend, and free yourself up with that. Like I find it frustrating that there's more diversity in the real world than you get on television. Like that, I am more likely to be a lawyer in real life, or a primary school teacher in real life, or an educational psychologist or a psychiatrist, or any of those things in real life, than I am to be cast as one. Yeah. And I think that's true for a lot of people who identify as kind of other from, what's perceived to be the mainstream, because of course, the others have been amongst all of us forever. And aren't really truly pragmatically in any sense other than society has gone, here's the privileged, acceptable, hot individual that we want to put in everything. So yeah, I just find it really kind of disappointing that art limits itself, actually, and is reductive, rather than the real world, where women will have hilarious and interesting conversations with one another, and they'll be really like spunky and adventurous in real life and do really interesting, cool and innovative things, and then in a script they're just kind of sat there. That's what I find frustrating, is that the real world is, if the real world's more interesting at the moment than the fantasy versions you're selling me, you're selling me something wrong. Yeah.
It's pointless.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the realization a lot of us had with, older school TV and film. Oh, the version you're selling me is less interesting than the real world.
Exactly, which is, half as interesting. Yeah.
No, more going on out here than on the screens.
Completely. It's so true. So true. And so going forward, and you were talking about, you're 40 and how you're feeling about your career ahead of you, and the age old thing that we know, there are less roles for women, like you said, women turn 40 and become a mum or a grandmother, and how are you feeling about that? I know that things are changing, but because you said that you've just had this really positive experience of feeling matched, with really great roles that really meet your skill and ability. Are you feeling positive? Are you having thoughts about moving into a different direction at some point, or do you think this is it? Are you gonna? I mean, I know that you kind of don't have so much control over it, but like right now, today, how are you feeling about it?
Right now, I feel positive. And I'll tell you why. It's a pragmatic thing. Because of the acting jobs I've recently had, financially, Gareth and I, our lives were actually in an okay financial position. So knowing that I've got some financial security behind me takes the fear out of the future And I've realized that's quite a privileged position to be in. But I think it's really interesting that that has changed my point of view. And it's also changed what I'm in a position to say yes to work-wise and what I'm in a position to say no to work-wise. So I've always turned down trope roles or stereotypical roles or roles that felt demeaning or limiting. So I've always, no matter what, financially, whatever position I would be in, I would always be in a position that I would turn those down and just get a job somewhere else. But what's interesting about my current situation and having leveled up for the moment in terms of work and status and the position that we're in financially, that allows me to be a little bit pickier and to wait and take a gamble a little bit more and to feel safe and secure in that. But it also frees me up to kind of in that space and time explore other options, maybe move a little bit more into producing, get myself some work experience in other related areas so that I'm in a position to make bigger and grander work myself that kind of forwards my belief system and the stuff that I'm interested in making and doing, whether it be as a producer or as an actress as well. So I think I feel really positive about all of those things. And it's interesting because it is that I'm actually in a bit of a secure position for the moment.
Yeah.
So I'm able to kind of have that luxury.
I guess that kind of mirrors what you were saying, what happened to you after Moulin Rouge, when you then had the financial position to be more independent and learn to drive, how did you describe it? Your parents' car was adapted so that you
Yeah.
could drive it, yeah. And then you were able to buy a ticket over to the UK. And it just shows, doesn't it, how much financial ease and stability just supports us in
Oh, it
our
massively
creativity.
does. I mean, even just, having friends that have sent their children to private schools, and I'm very much pro a public education system, but seeing how, mingling with the upper echelons of society through your private education and the people that it allows you to meet, you realize the networking starts really early.
Yeah.
And those connections kind of start really early. So people are kind of, leveling up their own business engagements at the age of 12, simply because they're becoming friends with the son of a wealthy family that's already invested in something in Saudi Arabia. And I think that having some financial security behind you as an individual completely allows you that freedom, because I think, one of the reasons why poor people are sort of so untapped for their talent is because their talent and abilities go completely into providing food and a roof for themselves. But there's a lot of talent and skill there that, should they be facilitated, that their basic needs were actually just met, they'd be freer to achieve and to live these amazing lives, because they're not just kind of scrabbling for survival, but they're actually able to use those talents to thrive.
Yeah, exactly. When you don't know where your next meal's coming from or how you're going to pay the rent, I think it takes a very particular type of person to go, no, I'm going to paint. I'm going to paint and write the great novel.
Yeah. I think that, and I think the fact that work has been so good to me for the last couple of years, I'm in that position for a little while to be able to go, right, let me springboard from where I am and do my kind of next big adventure. And it does feel a little bit like when I did Moulin Rouge, I mean, even just things like, I've got an adapted kitchen now. Yeah. So, preparing a meal is not this major athletic feat that it used to be.
Oh God, I remember like at Cotton Hill, you used to have to put your head inside the oven to light it.
Oh yeah, to light it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I know. I realized how many times, up until me getting an accessible kitchen a couple of years ago, I was taking my life into my own hands.
Every time.
Madness.
Yeah.
Absolute madness. Some of the things I used to do to achieve a cup of tea.
Oh my God. Oh, that's great to hear that you've got an adapted kitchen.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Makes such a difference. Such a difference.
And have you thought about directing?
It's funny. It's I would love to, but I still don't feel mature enough, and with the attention span that it requires. Like, it's funny, there's this little bit of me that likes to think the older I get, the more likely I'll do it. But at the moment, I'm still really enjoying the acting. But I think the sort of producing and eventually going across into making, making my own work or facilitating the work of others that kind of promotes my belief system. Or value system is definitely on the cards.
Yeah, I can see that. I can really see that. That's fantastic. And and when that BAFTA does finally come round, we'll all be there waiting for the vomit.
I would love if that was literally my acceptance speech. That would delight me, that I just get up there in this beautiful outfit and then lean over and black.
And I mean, it's practically a political statement as well.
It feels like one. It actually feels like the most honest statement you could make. But I think it'd have to be the first BAFTA. By the second and the third, I'd like to think that maybe I make a speech.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking to me.
No, thank you. It's been a real pleasure to have a nice big chat.
You can find Kiruna on Instagram at Kiruna_Stamell, and you'll be able to see her new work in the upcoming period drama The Serpent Queen alongside Samantha Morton. I will include links in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to On the Irregular. Please make sure you review and subscribe, as it helps other listeners find us.